check this out. Let's see what this looks like on the inside. Wow. So these ones look a little bit less like snot than some of the other ones. All right, right now we are in the Brazilian Amazon near Manaus, in the heart of the Amazon, and we've got some interesting fruit here that we're gonna nature journal. So follow along at home. You can draw and paint from these images on this video, and we're going to talk about all of these. Hopefully we're going to be able to identify. Some of them are easy, but some of them are harder. Obviously, some of them are very easy, and we're going to try to identify them, maybe learn a little bit about them from a book, but mostly since we're nature journaling, it's going to be based on direct observation. So let's dive in. To start off, I'm going to start with something easy just to make sure I don't get any perfectionism right at the beginning. So we'll start with one that I know is going to be visually easier to make an appealing drawing with. So let's start with this right here. Okay, ciao, ciao, obrigado por tudo. Okay, so sometimes when you first start out, it's important to just get something onto the page that you can feel good about, and that's why I'm starting with these cashew fruit. They're also very interesting, the way that cashew is sticking out from this part here, and I think this might actually be one of the things that botanically, like if you want to be an annoying know-it-all or you want some ornamental knowledge, I think this is an example of something that is technically not even a fruit, that this is like a receptacle or something like that. So the fruit, technically, botanically speaking, is the fertilized ovary of a flower. And some things that we eat, such as I think strawberry is also an example. What we consider the fruit is technically, according to botanical terms, not a fruit. I can't remember if that's correct right now, so don't quote me on it. But what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna write something on here to also start getting some words and something more than just pretty pictures. Is this even a fruit? Also, just a little bit of humor to get a little bit of humor on the page and make it a little bit more lighthearted. So I could dive into color right now if I want, or I could try drawing it from a couple different perspectives. I'm gonna try to get one drawing at least that shows the perspective a little bit better, because these are all sort of without perspective. It's important to know that some things are objectively easier to draw than others. Like this fruit right here, for example, it has, I have a feeling this is gonna be objectively hard to draw, because when I draw this, it's not gonna have like a clear visual appearance that's easily recognizable compared to something like this chili pepper right here. If I draw this, even if I don't draw it very accurately, it's very iconic in its look. And so this is something that I would consider objectively easy to draw. This might also be objectively hard to draw. It's sort of a uniform green. There's not that much variation. If you just drew this, people might not know what it is. Once it's cut, for example, it might be a lot easier, or if you get this part here, but this shape of avocado might be a little bit hard to recognize as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and get some color on these, and then I'm gonna cut one open and start tasting it so we can get into that part and describe some of the other senses that we don't always get to describe when we're nature journaling. A lot of times when we're nature journaling, we don't think of writing about, we're easily conveying visual information we're getting about nature, but a lot of times we might write a little bit about sound and even less about smell, but it's very uncommon for people to nature journal about taste, and nature journaling fruit like this is one of the few exceptions. So we might as well take advantage of that fact and write about the taste. Oh, speaking of aroma, I just got a really strong smell, the very characteristic cashew fruit smell right now, which is very hard to describe, but when we get to that part, I'm gonna have to do my best and try. A lot of times fruit is a good place to practice wet on wet techniques. So luckily this water brush that I picked is the really juicy one. So it's putting out water really fast. And in the humid climate here, it's probably close to 90% humidity, if not more. It just rained a little bit actually. And so this watercolor is gonna dry really slow. So I might as well try some different wet on wet techniques. Also, if you've watched my videos before, you know that I always have multiple water brushes with me. So I do have some water brushes that have a slower flow, and I always make sure that those are ready to go, especially when I'm working in more humid places. This has the slowest flow, This is intermediary flow, and this has the fastest flow. So we're gonna do some wet on wet. So it's good that I started with a wash with the juiciest of my water brushes, but later on when I want more control and I want things to dry faster, I'll use this one. Okay, I waited a little bit too long to try to do wet on wet, and you can see this is already too dry to do most wet on wet, but I'm gonna try and see what happens. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try dropping in some red. I'm seeing these little red spots, and see what happens if I put it in. Hopefully it'll do a little bit of wet on wet spreading. It looks like it's not, so I missed my window there. Here you can see on this one's perfect right there. So I can add a little bit of that texture on that one. Well, it's actually not texture, but it's sort of like a speckling. The other option is I could go over the orange wash or just go over it with plain water and then do the wet on wet. So for example, and this is a stain, it looks like the underneath one is a staining color. So now that's completely wet again. Now it's a little bit too wet. And I can come back and do wet on wet. So wet on wet is something that's fun to experiment with. Some people think all of watercolor is wet on wet, and that's a big problem in my opinion. So don't be too dependent on wet and wet. It's fun. It's also really easy to overdo it, but it is a powerful technique. So knowing when to use it and when not to use it is really helpful. When you need to create a sort of natural looking pattern that your human brain is likely to make too regular, the human brain usually makes things too regular compared to nature. That's when wet on wet can be really helpful, or for textures. I can see that I've already made it too regular, but I'm not gonna make a scientific illustration of these cashew fruit. I'm gonna try to keep going and not get caught up on one thing. But that you can see is a little bit of wet on wet, which I think at least gives you the idea of one of these fruit a little bit more. Sometimes, you know, now I'm noticing that more of the red color is at one end of the fruit. So let's see if we can imitate that a little bit more here. I don't want to get too perfectionist at the beginning, but I think I will try to get this just a little bit more. That's probably too strong. So let me get a little bit here and then spread it around. That's kind of perfect. I'm using slightly heavier paper than I used to. The quality of the paper is going to have a big effect on wet. And this is where having high quality, expensive watercolor paper that's like 100% cotton and has a nice texture, a surface meant for watercolor is going to make a difference. Other than that, for most of the time that I'm nature journaling, I don't worry about having good watercolor paper. I do watercolor on paper that is not intended for watercolor all the time. Okay, so while that is drying a little bit, I'm gonna look up some information and add some words to my page here. Since this information is gonna be coming from a book, it's really important to write down that it's coming from a book. Okay. All right, so I guess technically that cashew is not native to the Amazon biome, so it's not actually in this book. It might be native to, it's one of the other biomes. I think there's 6 major biomes maybe it's native to the Cerrado or the Caxinga are the most likely ones that I can think of that the anacardium is native to, so that's fine. It's not actually in this book, that's fine. Let's just write a little bit more about it, cut into it, and try to describe the smell. So you're ready to describe the smell? The aroma is hard to describe, but it's very characteristic, and it's I really enjoy the aroma. It's very, I would say, fruity, even though that's not super helpful, right? I'm gonna make a huge mess here, I can tell already. Hopefully I can clean up before the other people get here. So I'm gonna show one of these with a bite taken out of it and then describe the flavor. A lot of astringent. I would say fruity, floral, astringent, sub-acid, and low sweetness. I should make it dripping. All right, describing flavors of things is not a science. It's more like a poem. So I'm gonna just start sort of free associating here. Juicy, aromatic, floral, subacid, astringent, iconic, cashew, je ne sais quoi, which I don't know exactly how to spell. Je ne sais quoi, which in French just means I don't know what, but it has a meaning that's not translatable to English, so we use it in English. Okay, je ne sais quoi, astringent, iconic, and iconic cashew je ne sais quoi to it. I think that's all I'm gonna do to describe it, and then I'm gonna write up here cashew, and I think here it's caju with a J, and it's Anacardium. I think it might be Occidentale, but I'll look that up later. For sure it's in the Anacardium genus. Okay, I'm gonna color the seeds, and then I'm gonna move to the next fruit. Are you ready for the next fruit? Dun, 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 dun. This is a type of Passiflora. Passiflora is a huge genus. I think there's actually thousands of species in the genus. And this one is, the local name is, ¿cómo se llama? Maracuyá do mato. Se llama maracuyá do mato, verdade?
Maracuyá do mato, Passiflora
nitulus. Okay, nitulus. Okay, so it's maracuyá do mato, and possible species is nitidus, and we can look that up later too. But let's get into the fruit. And I think for this one, I'm not even gonna draw just the outside because it'll look very similar to the one we just did. So what I'm gonna do is a cross section, and cross section is a good way, especially once you start to learn which are these things that are objectively sort of hard to represent. You'll learn that some of them in cross section could have a much more interesting look and not just look like some kind of weird orange blob, especially since we already have orange oblong fruit on here. I'm gonna cut this one and try to make it a nice cross section and then draw from that. Sometimes you can do like two sort of position like that, and this is where having practiced some linear perspective is going to be helpful, because these are ellipses. So hopefully you've practiced drawing ellipses before, because that's what we're going to have to do here with this passion fruit. Okay, so, and I'm trying not to be perfectionist at this point, so I'm going to go quickly here around. Got seeds falling out. The quality of the seeds falling out is going to be very important here. The thickness of the outer part of the fruit is also important, and varies a lot between the different species of Passiflora. So if you want something that actually looks like this specific one and not just like a generic Passiflora, that would be an important part to try to capture. I'm gonna just pretend like there's a couple seeds that fell out. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's toucans calling in the forest near me. They have sort of a cry, I would call it, a slightly haunting sound that they make. And I believe it's the white-throated is the species, but I'm not positive. Okay, now I'm gonna get this in there. This is looking weird, so I'm actually gonna fake that to make it look a little bit bigger and add some black so that it looks like it goes in there. Okay, so this one is in the book, which means it's endemic from this region of Brazil. Brazil is no joke in terms of fruit biodiversity, so it's understandable that this book is just for the Amazon region and doesn't have the cashew, for example, because otherwise it would be a much huger book and it would be hard to manage. So let's get a little bit of information from the book. First of all, I'm seeing that I need to put the accent on the Portuguese name and these, what are they called? Dashes, maracujá do mato. And the name is Passiflora nitida. So Anahita was right. And I'm gonna put that in italics as it should be. Passiflora nitida. And I can also write that this is from, I can reference this book here. So I'll just say, what I'll do is I'll draw a little book symbol. I'll look at this more later, but at least we got the Latin name confirmed and the sort of the spelling and the accents, which are important. We could briefly flip through here. It looks like the flowers look very similar to Passiflora edulis. Oh, but look at the leaves. I will draw a leaf from the book because it's interesting to know that it has these entire leaves. It doesn't have, a lot of Passiflora will have like tri-lobed leaves or something like that. Okay, so this one right here is a passion fruit, but there's so many passion fruit. The Passiflora genus has thousands of species, from completely wild ones that have not an edible fruit to ones that have been domesticated and selected for a really long time. This one right here is called Maracujá do Mato in Brazil, in the Amazon, and it is Passiflora nitida. So let's try it out. I have tried lots of different passion fruits, but let's see what this one is like. The pulp around the seeds is kind of gray. A lot of times passion fruit have sort of like an orange or green color there. So these ones look a little bit less like snot than some of the other ones. The aroma is milder. The acidity is also milder. So I would consider them a subtle passion fruit. It still has some really nice floral aromas. It has a lot lower acidity, so the sweetness stands out more, but less of the acidity to balance the sweetness, and the aromas are kind of mild and more on the floral side, and less that crazy tropical fruit smack in the face that you get from some of the other passion fruits. Okay, next, let's try this one. I was trying to focus, but researchers at the science field station kept coming up to me and asking me about what I was doing. In this moment, one of the researchers comes up and starts sharing his experiences with local Amazonian fruit. Sim, mas agora não vou gravar o áudio, somente o vídeo.
No Igapó também tem mais fruta bem interessante.
Sim.
Hoje em dia, quando eu morava no interior, tinha umas frutinhas assim, que elas são bem roxinhas. Só tem no Igapó. Ela é bem docinha. Nunca mais eu vi desde que eu me mudei pra cidade.
Sim, eu acho que tem muitas coisas que não se comercializa, então eu acho que a gente tá perdendo muitas coisas comestíveis, na verdade. Eu já esqueci o nome disso aqui, você conhece?
Eu acho que não. Esse daqui.
Cubiu.
É o cubiu.
Sim. It's cool to see how excited that guy's voice was when we found the name for a fruit that he hadn't had since childhood. Now it's my turn to try that fruit if I don't get distracted by all the crazy sounds in the background. All right, so now I'm gonna try the Solanum sessiflorum. This one's called Cubiu in Brazil, and it looks a lot like what's called Naranjilla in Colombia, Ecuador, and Central America. So it's a Solanaceae. It's good to be careful with Solanaceae. These in Ecuador and Colombia are often used in drinks mixed with lots of sugar, but let's just see what the taste is like by itself. Very acidic. It has some astringency and bitterness. It also has a little bit of that Solanaceae flavor that tastes slightly poisonous. It doesn't have as much of the aromatics as I noticed in the Solanum quitoensis, which is the Naranjilla, but it's a lot bigger. So interesting. Supposedly it's used in salads and eaten raw here in the Amazonia of Brazil, but I think this would probably be better mixed with a bunch of sugar and water in a drink. So not getting that much interesting aromas, a little bit of like an eggplant smell and stuff like that, but got a fun drawing of it. It would also be a really cool plant. These are often very ornamental plants and have cool flowers. So in the book here on Amazonian fruits of the Manaus area, it has a picture of the plant somewhere here. You can see they have very big leaves. They're very cool looking, sort of like a giant monster eggplant. I think this one is also found on the Amazonian side of Ecuador. I've seen it in the markets there. Cool flowers, not as beautiful of a plant as Solanum quitoensis, which I think does better at higher altitudes. There's a lot of variation in the fruit too, so I'm gonna try to include that in my drawing. Fun title right here. Lettering is often underrated, but it can be a really fun part of nature journaling. And the way I'm going to do it right now is I'm actually going to start with watercolor instead of starting with my ink. And I'm going to take some interesting colors. One thing that I do sometimes is I contrast the colors that I have represented on the page. So for example, I don't have any blues here. I could do something that is blue for the title. Another way to do it is instead of doing a contrasting color, you could pick one of the colors from that page and use that for the title. So I think I'm gonna do the latter. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna choose a sort of underrepresented color on the page, which is this naphthalide maroon, which is a really fun color. So I'm gonna mix some of that right here, and I'll mix it with a little bit of orange and use a really wet water brush. And then you'll see that I'm gonna make the lettering really nice and juicy here. So I'm just gonna write fruit really big. And you can see that you can get a lot of variation with this. And one way that you can do it is you can tilt the page up and try to get it so that the watercolor sort of pulls up at the bottom, and that gives you a little bit of a three-dimensional effect. You could also drop in another color while it's still wet, but I don't think I'm gonna get that crazy on this one. And then you can outline this later if you want, or you can leave it just like that. And I think this color, naphthalide maroon by itself, looks pretty good. So I'm gonna do that. And then I'm gonna add a couple other things on there to be more specific. And I'm gonna use orange for that. Let's see if orange works by itself here. And I'm gonna write of Manaus, because that's the part of Brazil that I'm in right now and that these fruit are native to. And that's how you can do a title. Fun and easy. All right, so let's cut one of these and then draw. This one has this nice streaking on it. I don't know how characteristic that is, but if you're gonna draw an example of a fruit and make it represent the whole fruit species, it's important to notice if something's just an anomaly. You don't want to draw the anomaly. So I'm noticing that a lot of these don't have that green streaking. Maybe like a quarter of them. So that's not a very small amount. Or like, look at this one, has a lot of paleness here. That could be an anomaly. So you want to pay attention to that kind of stuff when you're deciding on a specimen to draw, if you want it to be representative. So I'm going to cut one of these so I can draw a cross section as well. Also, I'm noticing that some of them have more or less of this nipple on this end. Sometimes the fruit in cross section, it's a little bit easier to draw. Let's get the stem all on one side. So that looks pretty interesting, and I think that shows the fruit pretty well. So let's try drawing that side by side with one that hasn't been cut yet. Okay, here's one of the fruit that I got at the market in Manaus that I'm most excited about trying. It's in the Garcinia genus. It's Bakuri, and I think this one is Garcinia macrophylla. I'm not absolutely positive, but that's my guess. And it's in the Clusiaceae, which is a family I'm not super familiar with, but there's several other Garcinias. I think there's some Southeast Asian fruit that are in this family. So it has this thin skin. Not really any noticeable aroma from the outside. The skin is a little bit hard to peel, but once you get the skin off, you can get to the inside, which is a pulp. There's a pulp around the fruit there. So I'm starting to get a little bit of like a strawberry guava smell, slightly acidic, slightly aromatic, but nothing really crazy yet. And then I have these 3 seeds in there, each one covered by pulp. So let's try these out. Definitely acidic, but I'm also getting a fair amount of sweetness in the pulp. Hard to describe the flavor, but I would call it bright. It reminds me a lot of like lychee or rambutan. A little bit like ice cream bean, Inga, but very good and bright. And so I'll add all of those descriptions to my drawing and my notes. Smells like dirty socks, but this fruit is in the same genus as cacao. It's Cupuaçu, Theobroma grandiflorum. Let's try it out right now. But first I have to open it because I don't want to draw this plain brown sausage shape. I'm also running out of paper in my sketchbook, so I'm gonna have to go on to the next page because this is a big fruit and I think it's gonna be pretty interesting. So first I have to open it. That's not gonna work. This might work. All right, check this out. Let's see what this looks like on the inside. There we go. Doesn't look like cacao on the outside. Wow, that aroma is amazing though. Better than Theobroma cacao in my opinion, the aroma. Very floral. I'm not getting that rotten sock smell anymore. Dang, it's hard to describe. It's almost like jasmine. Jasmine with some fruity smells in there as well. Super floral, amazing aroma. I'm definitely have to spend some time trying to describe this fruit with words because I think it's gonna be really hard to draw this. Things like this can be objectively hard to draw. It's very subtle. The colors are not very strong. It's like brown and white and cream colored. So that's kind of a pain in the butt to draw. But let's see what we can do. Maybe if I can get the shape and pop out some of these seeds and describe the flavor, that would be best. So I'm gonna actually just try to pop out one of these seeds right now, get it ready to draw. Supposedly they have lots of fibers. Whoa. Very sour, not very much sweetness. This is usually used to make drinks. The aroma is really good, but very little sweetness to balance acidity. And very fibrous. Look at that. Definitely the kind of thing where you'd be happy to add sugar to it. Adding sugar is an amazing thing. But all right, let's try drawing this. Cupuaçu, Theobroma grandiflorum. All right, so am I gonna try to fit it on here? I think just to keep things simple, I am gonna try to fit it on this side of the page. So gonna have to squeeze. The biggest fruit is gonna get the least amount of space, which doesn't make sense, but that's what I'm gonna do. I can also draw me chopping it with the machete. Okay, that was fun. Got to learn about some new fruit, practice some nature journaling techniques, and you can follow along with this video, or you can look at fruit that you have near you when you're traveling. It's a great way to incorporate some edible biodiversity into your nature journaling. All right, see you next week. Bye.